hadn't even taken off my jacket when my wife's dad said, "Didn't realize they let dropouts in here." A few relatives chuckled. I just nodded and took a seat at the back. Later, my wife's sister's husband asked where I worked. I told him the company name. He paused. I hadn't even taken off my jacket when my wife's dad said, "Didn't realize they let dropouts in here." A few relatives chuckled. I just nodded and took a seat at the back. Later, my wife's sister's husband asked where I worked. I told him the company name. He paused, looked at me with this confused half smile, and said, "You mean like in the warehouse?" The dining room was the kind of ostentatious you only see in people who need you to know they have money. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen waterfalls above a table that could seat 20, and the walls were papered in something that looked expensive but felt desperate. Gold filigree on cream. The kind of pattern that whispers we matter in a voice too loud to be confident. Every surface gleamed. Every corner was staged. It was a museum of wealth, and I was the exhibit they hadn't asked for. "No," I said quietly. "I'm in data architecture." He laughed. Actually laughed. "Oh, so you fix computers." I didn't correct him. I've learned that some people hear what they want to hear, and in rooms like this, my words were already translated before they left my mouth. Dropout, blue collar, charity case. My wife Emma was across the room, radiant in a navy dress that cost more than my first car, laughing at something her mother said. She didn't look at me. She hadn't looked at me much lately. This was Thanksgiving. The Bradford family Thanksgiving. Not our Thanksgiving. I'd stopped calling it that years ago. This was their performance. Their yearly exhibition of love, togetherness, and prosperity, and I was the stagehand who'd somehow wandered into the spotlight. Emma's mother, Diane, had arranged everything with military precision: assigned seating, a menu curated by a private chef, wine pairings explained in detail to guests who nodded knowingly but couldn't tell a Bordeaux from a Beaujolais. The turkey sat at the center of the table like a monument to abundance, carved by Emma's father, Richard, with ceremonial gravitas. Richard Bradford, 6'2", silver-haired, with the kind of tan that comes from country clubs and winter homes in Palm Beach. He wore success like cologne, expensive, pervasive, impossible to ignore. He'd built his wealth in commercial real estate, buying strip malls and office parks in the 90s and riding the boom into early retirement. Now he spent his days golfing, serving on nonprofit boards, and reminding everyone in his orbit that he'd earned his comfort through hard work and smart decisions. The implication, always unspoken but clear, was that people like me, people without pedigree or inherited capital, hadn't worked hard enough or hadn't made smart enough choices. "James," Diane called from the head of the table, her voice cutting through the ambient chatter like a knife through buttercream. "Would you mind helping in the kitchen? I think they need someone to carry out the side dishes." I stood without a word. Emma still didn't look at me. The kitchen was all white marble and stainless steel, a laboratory of culinary precision. The catering staff moved with practiced efficiency, plating sweet potatoes and green bean casserole with the kind of care usually reserved for museum installations. I picked up 2 heavy serving dishes and carried them to the dining room, setting them on the table while Richard carved the turkey and held court about interest rates and market corrections. "The problem with this economy," he was saying, gesturing with the carving knife for emphasis, "is that people expect everything to be handed to them. No one wants to work anymore. Everyone wants a participation trophy." Murmurs of agreement rippled around the table. I returned to the kitchen for more dishes. On my third trip, Emma's sister, Lauren, intercepted me in the hallway. She was 2 years younger than Emma, with the same auburn hair and green eyes, but where Emma had softness, Lauren had edges. She worked in marketing for a luxury skincare brand and treated every conversation like a pitch meeting. "James," she said, touching my arm with manicured fingers, "I wanted to ask, are you still doing that computer thing?" "Data architecture, yeah." Right, right." She smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. "That's so great. I mean, it's important work, even if it's not, you know." She trailed off, letting the silence finish her sentence. "Not prestigious, not noteworthy, not something she could brag about at brunch." "Even if it's not what?" I asked. "Oh, nothing. I just mean it's wonderful that you found something you're good at. Not everyone can say that." She patted my arm and glided back to the dining room, leaving me standing in the hallway, with a bowl of cranberry sauce in each hand. I set them on the table and took my seat at the far end, the spot they designated for me 3 years ago when Emma and I first got married. The kids' table would have been more apt. I was surrounded by Emma's younger cousins, college students and recent graduates who talked about internships and study abroad programs and their parents' vacation homes. They were polite enough, but their eyes glazed over whenever I spoke. I was a curiosity at best, an inconvenience at worst. Dinner began with a prayer led by Richard, a solemn invocation of gratitude that felt more like a performance review. He thanked God for their blessings, their health, their continued prosperity, and he asked for wisdom in stewarding their resources and strength in facing the challenges of a changing world. He did not mention me by name, but when he said, "And we're grateful for everyone gathered here, even those still finding their way," I felt Emma's mother glance in my direction. The meal itself was a marathon of small humiliations. Richard asked me about my little projects at work, framing my career as a hobby. Diane inquired about our living situation with the kind of concern usually reserved for discussing a terminal diagnosis. "Still renting, I assume?" she asked, as though homeownership were a moral achievement I'd failed to unlock. Emma's brother, Marcus, recently promoted to VP at his father's old firm, described his new Tesla in excruciating detail, then asked what I drove. When I said I took the bus to work, the table went quiet for exactly 3 seconds before someone changed the subject to the weather. They weren't cruel exactly. They were surgical. Every comment was calibrated to remind me of my place, to reinforce the hierarchy, to ensure I understood that I'd married up and should be grateful for the privilege. And the terrible thing, the thing I couldn't quite admit even to myself, was that for a long time, I'd believed them. I'd internalized their narrative. I was the dropout, the blue-collar husband, the project Emma had taken on, the fixer-upper she'd eventually tire of refinishing. After dinner, the men retired to Richard's study for brandy and cigars, an affectation so theatrical it would have been funny if it weren't so painfully sincere. I wasn't invited. I helped clear the table instead, carrying dishes to the kitchen while Emma and her mother and sister sat in the living room discussing vacation plans. Through the doorway, I could hear them laughing, their voices bright and easy, the sound of people who belong. I stood at the sink, rinsing plates, and caught my reflection in the window. 34 years old, dark circles under my eyes from working late nights, shoulders slightly hunched from years of sitting at a desk. I looked tired. I looked defeated. I looked exactly like the person they thought I was. But here's what they didn't know. I'd been keeping a record. Not out of spite, not initially. I'm a data architect. I document things. It's what I do. I keep records. I organize information. I build systems that make sense of chaos. So when Richard made his first comment about dropouts at that very first Thanksgiving, I noted it. When Diane suggested Emma could have done better, I filed it away. When Marcus casually mentioned that my salary was cute, I archived it. Every slight, every condescension, every reminder that I wasn't good enough, I logged it all. Not in anger, not even consciously at first. It was just data. Numbers, dates, quotes. The raw material of reality. But data, I've learned, becomes power when you know what to do with it. And over the course of 3 years, I'd built something, a structure, an archive, a perfectly organized collection of receipts. I didn't know yet what I'd do with it. I didn't know if I'd do anything at all. But standing there in Diane's pristine kitchen, drying my hands on a monogrammed towel, while the people who'd spent years diminishing me laughed in the next room, I felt something shift. It was subtle, like the first crack in a frozen lake. You wouldn't notice it unless you were listening, unless you knew what to listen for. The evening ended the way it always did. Emma's family gathered for a photo on the grand staircase, everyone smiling in their Thanksgiving best. A tableau of American prosperity. I took the photo. I'm always the one taking the photo. "Make sure you get the chandelier in frame," Diane instructed. "It's Venetian." I adjusted the angle. Through the camera's viewfinder, they looked perfect, untouchable. A family that had everything figured out, everything in its proper place. I pressed the shutter button, capturing the moment for their annual Christmas card. What they didn't see, what they couldn't see, was that I'd started building my own frame. Different angles, different lighting. A narrative composed from the same raw material but organized to reveal a different truth. They thought I was invisible. They thought I was harmless. They thought I was too small to matter. That was their first mistake. We drove home in silence, Emma scrolling through her phone while I navigated the dark suburban streets. The houses we passed were decorated for the holidays. Warm glowing windows, wreaths on doors, that aspirational vision of American comfort. Our apartment was in a different neighborhood entirely. Smaller buildings, fewer decorations, cars parked on the street instead of in driveways. Your family's looking well, I said, trying to break the quiet. Mm-hmm. Your mom's chandelier is new. Mm-hmm. Emma. She looked up from her phone. What? Nothing. Never mind. She returned to scrolling. I could see her screen in my peripheral vision. Instagram, a feed of curated lives, everyone's highlight reel. She double-tapped a photo of her sister at some charity gala, then one of her mother at a spa resort. She didn't post photos of us, not anymore. When we got home, she went straight to the bedroom. I stayed in the living room, opening my laptop at the small desk by the window. The apartment was quiet except for the distant hum of traffic and the clicking of my keyboard. I opened a folder labeled Archive Personal and added the day's entries. November 23rd, 2023. Thanksgiving, Richard. Didn't realize they let dropouts in here. Context. Arrival, front entrance, 5:47 p.m. Witnesses, Lauren, Marcus, Aunt Cheryl, 2 cousins. Trevor, Lauren's husband. You mean like in the warehouse? Context. Discussing employment, 6:15 p.m. Correction given data architecture, response, laughter, dismissive. Diane, still renting, I assume? Context. Dinner table, 7:30 p.m. Tone, pitying. Emma's response, change subject. I kept typing, documenting the evening with the same precision I used at work. Facts, timestamps, context. The raw data of my life organized into something coherent, something legible, something useful. At the bottom of the document, I added a note to myself. 3 years, 97 documented incidents. Pattern analysis suggests escalation. Emma's participation, passive but consistent. Family dynamic, established hierarchy, resistant to disruption. Conclusion, current trajectory unsustainable. I saved the file and closed the laptop. Through the bedroom door, I could hear Emma already asleep or pretending to be. I sat in the dark for a long time, watching the city lights blur through the window, thinking about frameworks and structures and the way information, properly organized, could rewrite reality itself. They thought they knew me. They thought they'd figured me out. They thought I was a simple equation with an obvious answer. That was their second mistake. Winter came early that year. By mid-December, the city was wrapped in a permanent gray cold, the kind that seeps into your bones and stays there. I took the bus to work every morning, watching my breath fog the windows while business people in warm cars sat in traffic, their headlights cutting through the pre-dawn darkness. The route took 45 minutes, snaking through neighborhoods that told the city's story in reverse, from our modest apartment building through increasingly desolate commercial strip, past shuttered factories and empty lots, until finally arriving at the gleaming glass tower that housed Axiom Technologies. The company name meant nothing to most people, which was exactly the point. We didn't make consumer products. We didn't have a flashy brand. We built the invisible infrastructure that made modern life possible. The data systems that powered everything from healthcare networks to financial institutions to government agencies. If you'd used an ATM, filed insurance paperwork, or received a hospital bill in the past decade, there was a decent chance my architecture was processing your information somewhere in the background. I'd been with the company for 9 years, starting as a junior analyst and working my way up through sheer persistence. No degree. I'd dropped out of college after 2 semesters when my mother got sick, and the medical bills made continuing impossible. But I had a gift for seeing patterns, for understanding how information wanted to be structured. I taught myself programming at night, built portfolio projects on weekends, networked at meetups and conferences. I made myself indispensable through competence. My current title was Senior Data Architect, though Emma's family somehow never retained that detail. To them, I was perpetually entry-level, perpetually struggling, perpetually one step away from asking Richard for a job reference. The disconnect between their perception and my reality had grown so vast over the years that I'd stopped trying to bridge it. Let them think what they wanted. Their misunderstanding was becoming useful. My office was on the 32nd floor, a corner space with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a view of the city I'd never mentioned to Emma's family because they'd find a way to diminish it. I spent my days building elegant systems from complex requirements, translating human needs into digital logic. The work was meditative in its precision. Unlike family dinners, unlike forced holiday gatherings, unlike my marriage, the problems I solved at work had clear parameters and definitive solutions. The code either worked or it didn't. The database either scaled or it didn't. There was a purity to it, an honesty. "Morning, James." My colleague Sarah appeared in my doorway, holding 2 coffees. She was one of the few people in my life who understood what I actually did for a living. We'd worked together on 3 major projects, and she'd saved me from countless meetings that should have been emails. "Please tell me one of those is for me," I said. "The good stuff. Triple shot." She set it on my desk and settled into the chair across from me. "So, I heard Mitchell's retiring." Mitchell was the CTO, a silver-haired veteran who'd founded the company's data division back when data architecture wasn't yet a buzzword. His retirement had been rumored for months, but never confirmed. "Where'd you hear that?" "Joyce in HR. Apparently, he's officially announcing next week, which means they'll be looking for a replacement." "And you," Sarah said, pointing at me with her coffee cup, "are the obvious choice." I'd thought about it, of course. The CTO position would come with a significant salary increase, enough to buy a house, enough to fundamentally change the narrative Emma's family had constructed around me. But the idea of pursuing it felt complicated in ways I couldn't quite articulate. Part of me wanted to prove them wrong, to walk into next Thanksgiving as a C-suite executive and watch their faces recalibrate. But another part of me, the part that had been taking notes for 3 years, wondered if proving anything to them was worth the effort. "I don't know," I said. "It's a lot of politics, a lot of visibility." "James, come on. You've built half the systems this company runs on. You've trained most of the team. Mitchell himself said you're the best architect he's ever worked with." "He said that?" Direct quote, last month's leadership meeting. Sarah stood, ready to return to her own office. "Just think about it, okay? Some of us would like to see competence rewarded for once." After she left, I turned to my computer and opened my personal archive, the folder I'd been maintaining for 3 years. It had grown significantly since Thanksgiving. What started as a simple document had evolved into a proper database: tables for incidents, categories for types of comments, tags for family members, timestamps, locations, witnesses. I'd even built a basic analytics dashboard to visualize patterns over time. The data told a clear story. The frequency of negative comments had increased steadily over the 3 years Emma and I had been married. The intensity had escalated as well, moving from subtle insinuations to overt dismissals. Richard had made 17 separate comments about my education, 12 about my salary, and 23 about my potential if I'd only apply myself. Diane had mentioned our apartment situation 9 times, my clothing choices 6 times, and our lack of children, her future grandchildren, 14 times. Marcus had questioned my competence in various ways 32 times. Lauren had made 11 comparisons between me and her husband, Trevor, always unfavorably. And Emma? Emma had corrected them 0 times. She'd defended me 0 times. She'd changed the subject 8 times, stayed silent 41 times, and on 6 occasions, she'd laughed along. The database didn't lie. People lied. Memory lied. But properly structured data, meticulously maintained, revealed truth. I added a new entry. December 15, 2023, Mitchell retiring. CTO position opening, potential salary, $280K, $320K base, equity, and current perception of my career by Emma's family. Cute, Marcus. Computers, and Trevor. Finding your way, Richard. Question, does correction serve any purpose? I saved the file and closed it. Through my office window, I could see snow beginning to fall, fat flakes drifting past the glass like punctuation marks in some cosmic sentence I couldn't quite read. That evening, I came home to find Emma already there, which was unusual. She usually worked late at the nonprofit where she served as a development director. Fundraising, donor relations, galas. It was meaningful work that happened to pay less than my job, though her family somehow never factored that into their assessment of our financial situation. To them, her work was noble. Mine was merely practical. "You're home early," I said, setting down my bag. She was on the couch, still in her work clothes, staring at her phone with an expression I couldn't quite read. "I need to talk to you about something." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. I need to talk. Never a good opening. I sat down in the chair across from her, maintaining distance, already cataloging the moment for my archive. "Okay," I said. She set down her phone and looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in what felt like weeks. "I've been thinking about us, about our marriage." My heart rate elevated slightly. I maintained a neutral expression. "All right, I just feel like we're in different places, like we want different things." She paused, searching for words. "You're so focused on work, on your projects, you're always on your computer, always distant. And I'm trying to build a life, trying to figure out our future, and I feel like you're just not present." I processed this, analyzed it, compared it to historical data. What would being present look like? I don't know. Actually caring about the things that matter? My family, your family, I said quietly, thinks I'm a failure. That's not true. Your father called me a dropout at Thanksgiving. Your brother-in-law asked if I worked in a warehouse. Your mother brings up our apartment like it's a character flaw. Emma's expression shifted, not quite defensive, but close. They're just, they come from a different world. They don't understand what you do. I've explained what I do multiple times. They choose not to understand. That's not fair, isn't it? I leaned forward slightly. "Emma, I've worked with you for 3 years to help them understand. I've answered their questions. I've been polite. I've taken their comments without responding. And not once, not one single time, have you corrected them when they diminish me in front of you." She looked away. "I don't want to create conflict in my family, but you're comfortable with me absorbing it. That's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean?" Silence stretched between us, thick and cold. Outside, the snow was falling harder now, accumulating on windowsills and car roofs, muffling the city's sounds. Emma picked up her phone again, a gesture I recognized as retreat. "I just think we need to figure out if this is working," she finally said. "If we're working." "Are you asking for a divorce?" The word landed between us like a stone thrown through glass. She flinched. "I'm saying I think we should consider whether we're making each other happy." "That's not an answer." "I don't have an answer right now." She stood, gathering her phone and keys. "I'm going to stay at Lauren's tonight. I need some space to think." She left without saying goodbye, the door closing with a soft click that somehow felt louder than if she'd slammed it. I sat in the quiet apartment for a long time, not moving, just breathing and thinking and organizing my thoughts into coherent structures. Then I opened my laptop and updated the archive. December 15th, 2023, evening. "Emma, I need to talk to you about something." Context. Marriage evaluation. Mentioned different places, man, not present, key statement. I don't want to create conflict in my family. Translation. Preserving family approval. Addressing disrespect towards spouse. Action taken. Staying at Lauren's house. Status. Pending dissolution likely. Observation. 3 years of documented incidents have established pattern. Emma's loyalty hierarchy clear. Family, marriage, partner. Question. At what point does documentation become evidence? I added a new section to the database labeled Financial Analysis and began pulling data. Our joint bank account, Emma's individual spending, the money her parents had loaned us for the wedding, which I'd insisted on paying back, but Emma had kept delaying. The credit card her mother had added her to for emergencies that seemed to have a lot of non-emergency charges. The subtle ways her family's wealth had become entangled with our marriage, creating dependencies I hadn't fully mapped until now. The numbers told their own story. Emma's family hadn't just been insulting me. They'd been investing in her escape route, creating financial ties that bound her to them while treating me as temporary, as provisional, as something she'd eventually outgrow. I worked through the night, building models, running scenarios, documenting everything. By dawn, I had a complete financial picture of our marriage, our debts, our assets, our entanglements. I had 3 years of documented emotional abuse disguised as family concern. I had text messages, emails, recorded conversations, legal in our state with one party consent, and my own meticulous observations. I had built something, a structure, an architecture of truth. I didn't know yet what I'd do with it, but as the sun rose over the city, painting the snow covered streets in shades of orange and gold, I realized something fundamental had shifted. I'd spent 3 years being small, being quiet, being the person they wanted me to be. I'd absorbed their contempt and filed it away, thinking documentation was enough, thinking the record itself was the point. But data without application is just noise. Information without action is just martyrdom. And I was tired of being the martyr in someone else's story. Emma came back 3 days later. She didn't apologize for leaving, didn't explain what she'd decided during her time at Lauren's. She simply returned to the apartment as if the conversation had never happened, resuming her routines with a careful neutrality that felt more like performance than peace. I didn't push, I was busy. Mitchell made his official announcement on Monday morning, retiring at the end of March, to spend more time with his grandchildren and write the book he'd been threatening to write for 20 years. The CTO search would begin immediately, with a preference for internal candidates. The email went out to the entire technology division, copying senior leadership and HR, and my phone started buzzing within minutes. Sarah, you're applying, right? Marcus, different Marcus, my mentor from my early days at the company. If you don't throw your hat in, I'm throwing it in for you. Even Mitchell himself stopped by my office that afternoon, his retirement already making him looser, more candid. You know you're the obvious choice, he said, settling into the chair across from my desk like he had 100 times before when we'd worked through complex problems together. I appreciate that, I said, but there are other qualified people. Qualified isn't the same as right. You don't just understand the systems, James. You understand how to build systems that last. That's rare. He paused, studying me with the kind of attention I'd learned to respect over the years. What's holding you back? I thought about Emma, about her family, about the way the promotion would change their narrative about me, force them to recalibrate their assumptions, but also about how it wouldn't matter. Not really, because they'd already decided who I was, and people rarely let evidence interfere with their beliefs. Nothing's holding me back, I said finally. I'll apply. Mitchell smiled. Good, because between you and me, the board's going to offer it to you anyway. This is just the formality. He left, and I sat alone in my office, watching the city below, thinking about structures and frameworks and the way everything in life is just a series of interconnected systems waiting to be understood. I submitted my application that evening, along with a detailed proposal for the company's next 5-year data strategy. It was 147 pages long, complete with technical specifications, budget projections, risk analyses, and implementation timelines. I'd been working on it for months, refining it in the margins of my regular work, building it the way I built everything, carefully, methodically, with attention to the architecture beneath the surface. Emma was asleep when I submitted it, or pretending to be. We'd been sharing the apartment like polite roommates, maintaining separate schedules, communicating through sticky notes left on the kitchen counter. The distance between us had become geometric, measurable, a quantifiable thing I could track if I wanted to. But I was tracking other things now. Christmas approached, bringing with it the annual Bradford family gathering, a multi-day affair that involved staying at Richard and Diane's house, a 6-bedroom colonial in an exclusive suburb. Emma had already confirmed we'd be attending, not asking if I wanted to go, just informing me of the dates. I didn't object. I had my reasons for wanting to be there. The weekend before Christmas, I received the call I'd been expecting. HR wanted to schedule my final interview for the CTO position. It was mostly ceremonial. Mitchell was right. The job was essentially mine, but they needed to observe the process. The interview would be the week between Christmas and New Year's, with an expected start date in April. I told Emma over dinner, a microwaved meal eaten at our small table, her phone face down beside her plate, in what had become her signature gesture of present but distant. That's great, she said, her tone carefully neutral. Congratulations. It's not official yet, but it will be, she picked at her food. That's a big promotion. Yes. Does it come with more money? Significantly more. She nodded, slowly processing. I could almost see the calculations happening behind her eyes. What the promotion meant, how it changed things, whether it changed enough. Maybe we should wait to tell my family, she said finally, until it's official. You know how they are about things that might not happen. Translation. You know how they'll react if you don't actually get it. You know they'll use it as more evidence of your inadequacy. Sure, I said. We can wait. That night, I added the conversation to my archive, along with a note. Emma's instinct is to protect family narrative rather than celebrate partner's achievement. Pattern continues. We drove to her parents' house on December 23rd, the car loaded with presents Emma had bought and wrapped without my input. The Bradford Christmas was an elaborate production, matching pajamas for the family photos, a gift exchange with a complicated point system Richard had designed to ensure fairness, multiple meals prepared by caterers, and enough decorations to make the house look like it had been colonized by Santa's logistics division. Richard greeted us at the door wearing a cardigan that probably cost more than my monthly bus pass. The kids finally made it, he announced to the assembled family already inside. At 34 and 32, Emma and I were apparently still kids. Emma, darling, you look wonderful. James, good to see you. You can put the bags in the usual room. You know where? The usual room was the smallest bedroom, the one that had been Emma's when she was in high school, now converted into a guest room, but still containing hints of her teenage self. Old field hockey trophies, a corkboard with faded photos, a bookshelf with her high school yearbooks. It was adjacent to the room where Lauren and Trevor stayed, and I could already hear them through the wall, Lauren's laugh carrying through the shared heating duct. I unpacked mechanically while Emma went downstairs to greet her siblings. Through the window, I could see the neighborhood. Houses decorated with tasteful lights, luxury cars and driveways, the kind of intentional prosperity that felt like a rebuke to everyone who'd chosen or been forced to live differently. My phone buzzed. Sarah, hope you're surviving the in-laws. Remember, only 48 more hours. I typed back, I've survived worse. Her reply was immediate. Have you, though? I smiled despite myself and pocketed my phone. Dinner that night was prime rib and Yorkshire pudding, served on china that Diane explained had been in the family for 4 generations. I was seated, as always, at the far end of the table, next to Emma's teenage cousin, Ashley, who spent the meal texting under the table and occasionally glancing at me with what might have been sympathy or might have been boredom. Richard led the conversation, steering it through safe topics. The stock market's performance, upcoming vacations, Marcus's latest deal at work. Emma's brother had apparently closed a major acquisition, earning his firm a significant commission, and the table spent 20 minutes celebrating his achievement with the kind of detailed attention that felt designed to highlight what success actually looked like. Of course, Richard said, raising his wine glass toward Marcus. This is what happens when you combine education with opportunity, when you're given the right foundation and you build on it properly. I cut my prime rib, chewed, swallowed. James, Diane said, her voice carrying that particular tone of charitable interest. Emma mentioned you're doing well at your job. Still with the computer company? Still there, I confirmed. And how's that going? Are you... She paused delicately. Moving up at all? This was my moment. I could mention the CTO position, the interview, the all but guaranteed promotion. I could watch them recalibrate their assumptions in real time, could force them to confront the reality that they'd misjudged me. But something stopped me. Maybe it was Emma's earlier comment about waiting. Maybe it was the instinct that their reaction would be dismissive anyway. They'd find a way to minimize it, to make it smaller than Marx's achievements, to maintain their hierarchy. Or maybe it was something else entirely, something I hadn't quite articulated yet even to myself. Steady work, I said. Pays the bills. I saw Emma glance at me sharply, surprise flickering across her face, but I didn't elaborate, and the conversation moved on, and the moment passed. Later, after dinner, the family gathered in the living room for what Richard called Christmas Eve, his tradition of opening one gift each before the main event on Christmas morning. The room was magazine perfect, a 12-foot tree decorated in coordinated silver and gold, a fireplace with gas logs flickering behind glass doors, built-in shelves displaying family photos in expensive frames. Everyone arranged themselves on the various couches and chairs, while Richard played Santa, distributing boxes with theatrical flair. I received a gift card to a department store, wrapped in an envelope with my name spelled Jim. Emma received a cashmere sweater and a donation made in her name to her favorite charity. The disparity wasn't even subtle anymore. Jim, Richard said, using the name no one called me, we figured you could use some new clothes, for work. Professional appearance matters in business. Thank you, I said, holding the envelope. Of course, of course. We take care of family. He moved on to Lauren, presenting her with some elaborate kitchen gadget she'd apparently wanted, and the room's attention shifted. I excused myself to use the bathroom, climbing the stairs to the second floor. But instead of going to the bathroom, I detoured to Richard's study, a room I'd glimpsed before but never entered. The door was slightly ajar, and I pushed it open, stepping inside. It was exactly what you'd expect. Mahogany desk, leather chairs, walls lined with books that looked expensive but unopened. Golf trophies on one shelf. Framed photos of Richard with various local politicians and minor celebrities. A liquor cart with crystal decanters. The room was a shrine to himself. A carefully curated space that announced, I have made it. On the desk, I noticed a folder labeled Financial Review 2023. I shouldn't have looked. I knew I shouldn't have looked. But I've spent my entire career managing information, understanding systems, seeing patterns others miss. And something about that folder called to me. I opened it. Inside were bank statements, investment summaries, tax documents. The architecture of Richard's wealth laid bare. And there, 3 pages in, I found something interesting, very interesting. A legal document dated 18 months ago, Emma Bradford listed as co-signer. A home equity line of credit for $200,000 drawn against this house with Emma's signature required for authorization. I took a photo with my phone, then another of the accompanying loan agreement, and a third of the payment schedule. James, I turned to find Emma standing in the doorway, her expression confused. What are you doing in here? I closed the folder carefully, returning it to its exact position. Looking for the bathroom, wrong door. She stared at me, not quite believing, but not quite challenging either. It's down the hall. Right, thanks. I walked past her, my heart rate elevated, but my expression neutral. In the bathroom, I locked the door and opened my phone, reviewing the photos I'd taken. The loan was real. Emma had co-signed it. And according to the payment schedule, Richard was 3 months behind on payments. The implications cascaded through my mind like a program executing. Richard Bradford, the self-made success story, the man who'd spent 3 years lecturing me about financial responsibility and hard work, was over-leveraged, and he'd entangled his daughter in his debt without telling her husband. I added the photos to my archive, creating a new folder labeled Financial Entanglements. Then I flushed the toilet for effect and returned downstairs. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of forced cheer. We watched a Christmas movie, drank spiked hot chocolate, listened to Richard tell stories about Christmases past. I sat in my assigned spot, smiling at the right moments, maintaining the role I'd been given. But inside, I was building something, connecting pieces, seeing the architecture beneath the performance. That night, lying in Emma's childhood bed while she breathed softly beside me, I opened my laptop and began a new document. Not a list of grievances this time, not a catalog of insults, something different. A map, every connection between Emma's family and our marriage. Every financial tie, every shared account, every loan and gift and temporary help that had created dependencies. I tracked it all, building a network diagram that showed how thoroughly her family had woven themselves into our life, creating obligations that looked like generosity but functioned like chains. The wedding they'd helped pay for, $35,000 loan still outstanding. The furniture in our apartment, gifts from Diane that came with expectations of gratitude. Emma's car, technically a gift from Richard, but titled in his name. The emergency credit card. Emma was an authorized user, but Richard controlled it. And now this, a $200,000 loan Emma had co-signed without telling me, binding her legally to her father's financial decisions. I worked until dawn, mapping everything, documenting everything, building a complete picture of a system designed to keep Emma dependent and me irrelevant. When the sun rose on Christmas Eve morning, painting the snow-covered lawn in shades of pink and gold, I finally understood what I was looking at. This wasn't a family. It was a corporation, and Emma was an asset they'd invested in. I was the external vendor they'd reluctantly contracted with, the outsider whose presence was tolerated but never valued. And corporations, I knew from professional experience, respond to only one thing: leverage. I was beginning to acquire some. Christmas morning arrived with the kind of manufactured joy that wealthy families do so well. The Bradford house smelled of cinnamon and pine. Soundtracked by tasteful holiday music playing through hidden speakers, we gathered around the massive tree at 8 a.m. sharp. Richard's decree, everyone in matching pajamas that Diane had ordered for the family photo that would later appear on their annual Christmas card. I was not in the photo. I took the photo. Make sure you get the tree topper, Diane instructed, adjusting her position on the couch. And Richard, maybe sit up a bit straighter. Lauren, smile more naturally, darling. Marcus, can you put your arm around your father? Perfect. Everyone say blessed. Blessed, they chorused in unison, their smiles identical and practiced, museum quality. I clicked the shutter button repeatedly, capturing multiple versions of their performance. Through the camera's viewfinder, they looked like a stock photo come to life, the kind of image that appears in department store picture frames to show you what happiness supposedly looks like. What they didn't know was that I'd set my phone to record video, not just photos. The audio is capturing everything, their casual asides, their small corrections, Diane's whispered comment to Emma about my inappropriate flannel pajamas, the only ones I owned because I'd refused to let them buy me their matching set. Every word, every gesture, every micro-expression that revealed the mechanics beneath the performance. Data, evidence, raw material for the structure I was building. The gift exchange was an elaborate affair orchestrated by Richard's point system, some complex formula he'd devised to ensure everyone spent roughly the same amount, while still allowing for special gifts that somehow always favored Marcus and Lauren. Emma received jewelry, designer clothes, a spa package. I received practical items, a tool set, a winter coat from an outlet store, a coffee maker for your early mornings. The disparity was so obvious it had become invisible to them, just part of the natural order. James, Richard said after the presents were opened, I've been meaning to talk to you about something, man to man. He gestured toward the kitchen and I followed it, knowing this conversation had been coming for a while. We stood by the granite countertop while the rest of the family laughed and chatted in the living room, admiring their gifts, taking photos for social media. Listen, Richard began, adopting what he probably thought was a fatherly tone. I know things have been challenging for you and Emma. Money's tight, I get it. You're doing your best with what you've got. I waited, let him build his case. And I want you to know that Diane and we're here to help. We've been talking and we think it might be a good idea for you two to move back here for a bit. Just temporarily. Save some money, get on your feet properly. Move back here, I repeated slowly. Just until you're more stable. Emma's old room is available and there's plenty of space. You could save up, maybe go back to school, get a real degree. I have connections at the community college. I appreciate the offer, I said, cutting him off. But we're fine where we are. Are you, though? Richard's expression shifted, becoming more serious. Because from where I'm standing, you're barely making ends meet. Emma deserves better than that, James. She deserves stability, security, the things her mother and I worked hard to provide. There it was. The core message, stripped of pleasantries. You're not good enough. You're never going to be good enough. Let us take her back. Emma seems happy with our current situation, I said carefully. Does she? Richard leaned against the counter, his posture relaxed, but his eyes sharp. Because she's been talking to her mother lately, about options, about whether she made the right choice. My pulse elevated slightly, but I maintained neutral expression. What kind of options? The kind people consider when they're reassessing their decisions. He paused, letting that sink in. I'm not saying she's unhappy with you, James. I'm saying she's unhappy with the life you're able to provide. There's a difference. I processed this information, filed it away with the rest. Did Emma tell you she was unhappy? A father knows these things. I see it in her face when she's here, the way she relaxes, like she can finally breathe. Then I see how she tenses up when it's time to go back to that apartment. She misses this. He gestured vaguely at the opulent kitchen at the house beyond. She misses her life. Her life before me, I said. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. Richard studied me for a long moment, and I could see him recalculating, reassessing. You're a smart guy, James. Smarter than I initially gave you credit for. So I'm going to be direct. If you love my daughter, if you really love her, you'll think seriously about whether you're what's best for her, whether she wouldn't be happier with someone more compatible with who she is. The words hung between us, sharp-edged and deliberate. This wasn't concern. This was dismissal dressed up as wisdom, a business negotiation framed as family advice. I'll think about it, I said, my voice even. Good. Richard clapped my shoulder in what was meant to be a companionable gesture. That's all I ask. Now come on, let's get back before they eat all the cinnamon rolls. We returned to the living room, where Emma was showing Diane photos on her phone, both of them laughing at something. She looked up as we entered, her smile faltering slightly when she saw my face. Everything okay? She asked. Fine, I said. Your dad was just offering some advice. Richard resumed his position as patriarch, distributing cinnamon rolls on delicate china plates, and the morning continued its scripted path. But something had shifted. A line had been crossed. Richard had made his position explicit, and in doing so, he'd given me something valuable. Clarity. That afternoon, while everyone was occupied with a board game tournament in the den, I retreated to Emma's childhood bedroom and opened my laptop. I pulled up the financial documents I'd photographed from Richard's study, cross-referencing them with public records I could access through various databases. What I found was illuminating. Richard Bradford's empire was not as solid as he'd led everyone to believe. The commercial real estate holdings he'd built his reputation on were mostly leveraged, mortgaged to the hilt. He'd refinanced this house twice in the past 5 years, pulling out equity each time. The $200,000 loan Emma had co-signed was just one of several financial maneuvers designed to keep cash flowing while assets depreciated. He wasn't wealthy. He was performing wealth, using debt and careful staging to maintain the illusion of success. And he'd made Emma complicit in that performance without her knowledge. I created a new document, a comprehensive financial analysis titled The Bradford Economic Reality versus Narrative. It was 23 pages long by the time I finished, complete with charts, timelines, and documented evidence of every loan, every refinance, every financial pressure point. It was the kind of report I'd build for a client at work, except this client was my marriage, and the system I was analyzing was the family that had spent 3 years making me feel inadequate. The irony was almost beautiful. Richard had been lecturing me about financial responsibility while drowning in debt he'd hidden from everyone, including his own daughter. I saved the document to my encrypted archive and closed my laptop just as Emma entered the room. Hey, she said, sitting on the edge of the bed. You've been up here a while. Everything okay? Just needed some quiet. She nodded, picking at a loose thread on the comforter. My dad talked to you this morning. He did. About us. About his concerns regarding us, I corrected gently. Emma was quiet for a moment, then, he means well, does he? James? Emma. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. I turned to face her fully. Did you co-sign a loan for your father, a home equity line of credit, about 18 months ago? Her face changed. Not surprise exactly. More like the expression of someone who's been caught doing something they'd hoped would stay hidden. How did you? So you did. It was just, he needed it for some business thing. He asked me to help, and She trailed off, defensive. It's my family, James. What was I supposed to say? You were supposed to tell your husband. We're married. That affects both of us. It doesn't affect you. It's in my name. Your name is legally tied to mine. Our credit is connected. If he defaults, he won't default. He's 3 months behind on payments. Emma's expression shifted from defensive to shocked. What? I shouldn't have said that. I had revealed too much, shown too many cards. But the words were out now, and I watched her process them, watched the implications cascade across her face. How do you know that? She asked quietly. Because I pay attention, because I document things, because your father's financial situation isn't nearly as solid as he wants everyone to believe. You've been, investigating my family? I've been protecting myself. There's a difference. She stood abruptly, anger flashing in her eyes. This is exactly what I mean about you. This paranoia, this constant documentation of everything. You can't just let things be normal, can you? You always have to analyze everything, record everything, turn everything into some kind of project. Your father suggested I wasn't good enough for you, I said, cutting through her building rant. This morning, in the kitchen, he suggested you'd be happier with someone more compatible with your background. That stopped her. He didn't say that. He said exactly that. Would you like to hear the recording? You recorded? She stared at me like I was a stranger. What is wrong with you? What's wrong with me is that I spent 3 years listening to your family treat me like I'm inadequate, like I'm your charity project, while you stood by and said nothing. What's wrong with me is that your father just spent 10 minutes telling me I should leave you for your own good, and you're more upset about me documenting it than about him saying it. Maybe he has a point, Emma said, her voice shaking. Maybe we're not compatible. Maybe this was a mistake. The words felt inevitable, like we'd been building toward them for years. I could have gotten angry, could have fought back, could have told her about the CTO position, about the salary increase, about all the ways I could prove her family wrong about me. Instead, I said, maybe it was. She left the room without another word, and I heard her rapid footsteps down the stairs, heard muffled voices as she found her mother, found sanctuary in the family that had never really accepted me. I sat alone in her childhood bedroom, surrounded by her teenage trophies and faded photos, and felt something settle into place. A decision crystallizing, a structure finally complete. I opened my laptop one more time and began drafting a new document, not a list of grievances, not a financial analysis, something different. An exit strategy, precise, documented, backed by 3 years of evidence that no one could dispute. If they wanted me gone, I'd go, but I'd leave on my terms, with my own narrative, armed with truth that couldn't be dismissed or diminished. The Bradford family Christmas continued downstairs. Laughter, music, the clink of champagne glasses. Up here in the quiet, I worked, building my case, preparing my departure, constructing the architecture of my freedom. They'd spent 3 years making me feel small. They'd underestimated what I was capable of understanding, recording, proving. That would be their final mistake. I drove home alone on December 26th. Emma stayed with her family, claiming she needed more time to think, more space to process. I didn't object. The apartment was quieter without her, and I needed quiet for what came next. My interview for the CTO position was scheduled for December 28th at 10 a.m. I spent the intervening day preparing, not for the interview itself, which I knew would be largely ceremonial, but for what would come after. I reviewed my 3-year archive, organizing it into a coherent narrative structure. I drafted several documents, a comprehensive timeline, a financial analysis, a summary of patterns. I backed everything up to multiple encrypted locations. I prepared the way I'd prepare for any major project at work, methodically, thoroughly, with attention to every variable. The interview was held in the executive conference room on the 45th floor, with panoramic views of the city stretching out below. 5 board members sat across from me, along with the CEO and the head of HR. They asked questions I'd anticipated, and I answered them with the same precision I brought to every technical problem. We discussed the 5-year strategy I'd outlined in my application, debated implementation approaches, explored budget considerations. 2 hours in, the CEO, a woman named Margaret Chen, who'd built the company from a startup into an industry leader, leaned back in her chair and smiled. James, I think we've heard enough. The position is yours if you want it. $300,000 base salary, equity package, full benefits. Start date April 1st. What do you say? I should have felt triumph. I should have felt validation. Instead, I felt the strange calm that comes from seeing a system finally resolve itself into clean lines. I'd be honored, I said. We shook hands. They congratulated me. HR walked me through the compensation package, the stock options, the executive perks. I signed preliminary paperwork, agreed to announce the promotion officially in January after the holidays. It was done. I'd achieved what Emma's family had spent 3 years suggesting was impossible for someone like me. I walked out of that building into the cold December afternoon a different person than I'd been walking in. Not because of the title or the money, but because I finally had leverage. Real, undeniable, documented leverage. I called Emma from the parking lot. She answered on the 4th ring, her voice cautious. Hey, I said. We need to talk. I know. I've been thinking a lot and I got the promotion, CTO, 300,000 base plus equity. Silence on the other end. Then, what? The position I interviewed for. It's mine. Official start in April. More silence. I could hear her breathing, could almost hear her recalculating everything. James, that's incredible. Why didn't you tell me you were up for something like that? You suggested I wait until it was official. I meant wait to tell my family, not. She stopped herself. This changes things. Does it? Of course it does. This is huge. We should celebrate. I should come home. We need to figure it out. Emma, stop. She stopped. I don't think this changes anything, I said carefully. 3 days ago, your father suggested I wasn't good enough for you. You said maybe he had a point. You said maybe our marriage was a mistake. I was upset. I didn't mean. You meant it. And honestly, I think you were right. Another long silence. When she spoke again, her voice was smaller. What are you saying? I'm saying we should separate. Officially. File for divorce. End this before we waste more time pretending it's working. But you just got this promotion. Everything's different now. Nothing's different. The only thing that's changed is your family can't dismiss me as easily. But that doesn't fix 3 years of them treating me like I was temporary and you letting them. James, please, can we just talk about this in person? I'm coming home. We can figure this out. There's something else you need to know, I said, cutting her off. I've been documenting everything, every comment, every slight, every financial entanglement between your family and our marriage. I have 3 years of evidence, Emma. Recordings, messages, financial documents. I know about every loan your father's taken out, every piece of leverage he's used to keep you dependent on him. You've been spying on us? I've been protecting myself, documenting reality. That's insane. James, that's not normal behavior. What's not normal is your father co-signing you onto a $200,000 loan without telling your husband. What's not normal is your family spending 3 years trying to convince you that you married beneath you while I documented every instance of their manipulation. Her breathing was faster now, panic edging in. What are you planning to do with all this documentation? Nothing, if we can end this cleanly. A simple divorce, straightforward division of assets, no drama. You go back to your family, I move forward with my career, and we both acknowledge this didn't work. And if I don't agree, then I'll use the evidence. I'll file for divorce anyway. But I'll make sure every piece of your family's financial instability becomes part of the public record. Every insult, every manipulation, every way they've used you as a financial tool while making me feel inadequate, it all becomes discoverable. You're blackmailing me. I'm offering you a choice, clean exit or messy truth. I could hear her crying now, soft sounds she was trying to suppress. Part of me felt guilty. Part of me remembered loving her, remembered the woman I'd married who'd seemed different from her family, who'd seemed to see me. But mostly I felt tired. Tired of being small, tired of being grateful for scraps, tired of living in a system designed to make me fail. I need time, she said finally. Take it, but Emma, I'm done pretending. I'm done being your family's project, your fixer-upper, your proof that you tried to marry for love instead of status. One way or another, I'm leaving. The only question is how much truth comes out in the process. I ended the call and sat in my car, watching my breath fog the windows, feeling nothing and everything at once. I'd done it. I'd drawn the line. I'd used the leverage I'd spent 3 years building. It felt like power and ruin at the same time. 3 days later, Emma came home. She looked exhausted, her eyes red from crying or not sleeping or both. We sat at our small kitchen table, the one that had witnessed so many silent dinners, and she handed me a folder. I talked to a lawyer, she said quietly. These are divorce papers, uncontested. We split everything 50-50, no arguing about assets. We're both free to move on. I opened the folder, reviewed the documents. They were exactly what I'd offered. Clean, simple, painless. Your family knows? I asked. I told them you got a big promotion and that we were separating. They don't know about the rest. And you'd like to keep it that way. She nodded. I'd like us both to move forward without destroying each other, if that's possible. I thought about my archive, about the evidence I'd collected, and about all the ways I could hurt them if I wanted to. About the satisfaction it might bring, seeing Richard's financial instability exposed, watching them face consequences for their treatment of me. But I also thought about the cost, the energy it would take, the person I'd become in the process. Okay, I said, we keep it clean. Relief washed across her face. Thank you. But Emma, I want you to understand something. I leaned forward, holding her gaze. What your family did to me, what you let them do, that was real. The way they made me feel small, how they dismissed everything I'd accomplished, how they used you as a financial asset while pretending to care about your happiness, all of that happened. I know. Do you? Because from where I'm sitting, you're relieved that I'm not going to expose it, but I'm not sure you actually see it. I'm not sure you understand how deeply your family's values are broken or how much you've absorbed them. She was quiet for a long time, then, I think I do now. I think leaving gave me perspective. Good, use it. We signed the papers that afternoon. Emma moved her things out over the next week, staying with her parents while she found her own apartment. We were cordial, even kind to each other. Two people who'd tried and failed to bridge unbridgeable differences. The divorce would be final in 60 days, pending court approval. I spent New Year's Eve alone in the apartment, which was too big now with half the furniture gone. At midnight, I opened my laptop and accessed my archive one final time. 3 years of documentation, 97 major incidents, financial analyses, recordings, messages, the complete architecture of a failed marriage and the family system that killed it. I read through it all, this monument I'd built to pain and evidence and truth. Then I did something I hadn't planned to do. I deleted it. Not all of it. I kept the financial documents, the ones that might matter if the divorce somehow became contested. But the rest, the recordings of dinners, the cataloged insults, the careful timestamps of every dismissive comment, I let it all go. Because I realized something in that moment. Keeping it would mean carrying them with me. It would mean remaining defined by their judgment, by their narrow view of worth, by their inability to see me clearly. The archive had served its purpose. It had given me leverage when I needed it, had helped me understand the system I was trapped in. But I didn't need it anymore. I wasn't that person, the one who needed to prove his worth through documentation. I was someone else now. Someone who'd achieved what they said was impossible, who'd built a career on competence rather than credentials, who'd chosen clarity over revenge. The delete key felt like freedom. April arrived with unexpected warmth, an early spring that turned the city green seemingly overnight. I started my new role as CTO on a Monday morning, walking into the executive suite with a sense of surreal accomplishment. My office was on the 45th floor, corner position, with windows on 2 walls offering views of the entire city. It was 3 times the size of my old workspace, furnished with the kind of careful neutrality that signaled status without demanding it. Sarah stopped by an hour after I'd settled in, carrying 2 coffees. "Look at you," she said, handing me a cup. "Corner office, C-suite. I knew you had it in you." Thanks for the vote of confidence. So, how does it feel? I thought about that. Different, good different, but different. And Emma? Divorce finalized 2 weeks ago. She's got her own place now. We're cordial. Sarah nodded, understanding what I wasn't saying. For what it's worth, I never thought you two quite fit. She seemed nice enough, but there was always something off, like you were performing for different audiences. She wasn't wrong. Emma and I had been performing different plays on the same stage, reading from scripts written by people we'd never met, trying to make our incompatible narratives work. "Water under the bridge now," I said. My first week as CTO was a whirlwind of meetings, strategy sessions, getting up to speed on projects I'd known about peripherally but now owned completely. Mitchell stopped by on Wednesday to congratulate me officially and offer advice. We sat in my new office, drinking coffee, talking about the challenges ahead. "The thing about leadership," he said, "is that it's not actually about the technical work. You already know how to build systems. The hard part is building the people who build the systems. Meaning half your job now is politics, managing egos, securing budgets, convincing the board that your 5-year plan is worth funding. You're going to spend less time coding and more time translating technical complexity into business value. That's the part I'm worried about." "Don't be. You've already been doing it, just informally. Now you'll have the authority to actually implement your ideas, instead of having to convince someone else to do it." He was right. The first month in the new role confirmed it. I spent my days in high-level strategy meetings, working with department heads to align their projects with broader company goals. I presented to the board, explaining why we needed to invest in infrastructure upgrades and security improvement. I hired new team members, restructuring the department to be more efficient. And the strangest thing happened. I was good at it. The skills I developed over 3 years of navigating Emma's family, reading subtext, understanding power dynamics, building careful arguments backed by evidence, translated directly into executive leadership. I'd learned to operate in systems designed to exclude me, which made me unusually good at redesigning those systems to work better. By July, we'd implemented the first phase of my 5-year strategy. By September, I'd secured board approval for a major infrastructure overhaul. By November, the trade publications were running articles about Axiom's transformation, and I was doing interviews about data architecture best practices. Emma sent me a text in October. Saw your interview in TechCrunch. You were always brilliant. I'm sorry I didn't see it clearly enough. I didn't respond. Not out of anger, but because there was nothing to say. She'd seen what her family trained her to see, credentials over competence, pedigree over performance. Breaking that conditioning wasn't something I could do for her. She'd have to do it herself. In December, exactly 1 year after the Christmas that had catalyzed everything, Sarah and I went to the company holiday party. It was held in a hotel ballroom downtown, fancy enough to feel celebratory but not ostentatious. I wore a new suit I'd bought with my first executive paycheck, and several people complimented me on how different I looked. More confident, they said, more comfortable in my own skin. You know what I think? Sarah said as we stood by the bar watching the party unfold. I think you finally stopped trying to prove something. What do you mean? You spent years justifying your existence to people who'd already decided you weren't enough. But you're not doing that anymore. You're just being, and it looks good on you. She was right. Somewhere in the process of ending my marriage, confronting the system that had diminished me, and stepping into authority I'd earned, I'd stopped performing. Stopped trying to translate myself into a language others would accept. I'd become fluent in my own worth. The following February, 2 years after Emma and I separated, I received an unexpected email. James, I know we haven't spoken in a while, and I respect the space you've needed, but I wanted to reach out because I think I owe you a real apology, not the surface level one I gave when we divorced. I've been in therapy for the past year, working through a lot of things about my family and the way I was raised. And I've come to understand how deeply I failed you during our marriage. Not just by letting my family treat you the way they did, but by absorbing their values so completely that I couldn't see who you actually were. You were right about everything, about my father's financial instability, about the way they used me as an asset, about how they needed you to be inadequate so they could feel superior. I see it all now, and it's horrifying to realize how complicit I was in my own manipulation. I'm not reaching out because I want to get back together. I know that ship sailed. And honestly, you deserve someone who sees you clearly from the start. I'm reaching out because I want you to know that the work you do, the person you are, it matters. It always mattered. And I'm sorry I couldn't see that when it counted. I hope you're well, I hope you're happy, and I hope someday you can forgive me, even though I haven't quite forgiven myself yet. Emma, I read the email 3 times, sitting in my office as the sun set over the city, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. I thought about responding, about engaging with her growth, about acknowledging the courage it took to send that message. Instead, I closed the email and returned to work. Not out of cruelty, not out of lingering anger, but because her journey wasn't mine to validate. She needed to do the work of becoming herself, for her own sake, not for my approval. And I needed to keep moving forward, building the life I'd earned through competence and clarity. And 3 years after I'd first started documenting my marriage's slow dissolution, I stood in the same office where Mitchell had first suggested I apply for his job, looking out at the same city view, and realized something fundamental. I wasn't angry anymore. The Bradford family hadn't destroyed me. They'd inadvertently trained me. Every slight had taught me to read power dynamics better. Every dismissal had made me more precise in documenting truth. Every attempt to make me small had given me the skills to build something larger. I'd entered that family as someone who needed their approval, who'd internalized their metrics of worth. I'd left as someone who understood that systems built on exclusion eventually collapse under their own contradictions. Richard Bradford had spent 3 years suggesting I wasn't good enough for his daughter. He was right, in a way. I wasn't good enough for the role he'd imagined. The grateful subordinate, the project to be fixed, the outsider who'd validate their superiority by never quite belonging. But I'd never wanted that role anyway. I'd wanted partnership, respect, the simple acknowledgement that I was building something valuable. When it became clear I wouldn't find that in the Bradford family system, I documented the evidence, built my leverage, and extracted myself. Clean, precise, backed by data. Exactly how I approached everything else in my life. 5 years after my divorce, I stood in a different kind of room. Not a corner office, though I still had one of those. Not a family gathering, though I had built a new kind of family, chosen rather than inherited, based on mutual respect rather than obligation. This was a conference hall at a tech industry summit, and I was giving the keynote speech on building resilient data systems. 300 people sat in the audience, taking notes, asking questions, treating my expertise as valuable rather than something to be diminished. Afterward, during the networking reception, a young woman approached me. She was in her late 20s, confident but with an edge of uncertainty I recognized from my own younger self. "Mr. Morrison, I'm Rachel. I just wanted to say thank you for your talk. That part about building systems that acknowledge human fallibility rather than punishing it, that really resonated." "Thank you. Are you in architecture yourself?" "Trying to be. I'm a senior analyst at a healthcare startup, but I don't have a degree and it's been challenging. Lots of people assume I don't know what I'm doing because I don't have the credentials." I smiled, recognizing that story. Tree. "Let me guess. They focus on what you don't have instead of what you've built." "Exactly. How did you deal with that?" "The imposter syndrome, the constant need to prove yourself." "Honestly, I documented everything. Kept records of my achievements, my projects, the problems I solved. Not to show off, but to remind myself what was real versus what people assumed about me. And eventually, I stopped trying to prove myself to people who'd already decided I wasn't enough. I just kept building, kept improving, and let the work speak louder than their assumptions." Rachel nodded, absorbing this. "That makes sense. Build the evidence, then let it do the work." "Precisely. And Rachel, the people who dismiss you because of what you don't have, they're revealing their own limitations, not yours. They've confused credentials with competence, paperwork with understanding. Your job isn't to convince them. It's to build things so undeniably good that their opinion becomes irrelevant." She thanked me and moved on, but the conversation stayed with me, because I realized that younger woman was who I'd been once, hungry to prove my worth to people who'd never value it, documenting everything in case I needed ammunition, building leverage as a defense mechanism. But somewhere along the way, the documentation had stopped being about defense and started being about clarity, about understanding systems well enough to either fix them or leave them, about gathering evidence not to wound others but to protect the truth of my own experience. That evening, I had dinner with Sarah and Marcus, the colleague Marcus, not Emma's brother, and a few others from my team. We'd become close over the years, built a kind of professional family that extended into genuine friendship. We talked about work and life and the strange paths that had led us to where we were. "You know what I respect about you," Marcus said at one point, a bit loose from the wine. "You never became bitter. You had every reason to with your ex-wife's family, but you didn't let it poison you." "I think I was bitter for a while," I admitted. "But bitterness is expensive. It costs too much energy to maintain. At some point, I had to decide whether I wanted to carry that weight or build something better with the same effort." "That's very zen," Sarah teased. "Who are you and what did you do with the guy who used to document everything obsessively?" "He grew up," I said. "Realized that not every wrong needs to be avenged. Some things just need to be survived and learned from." Later that night, alone in my apartment, larger than the one I'd shared with Emma, furnished with things I'd chosen rather than things given or inherited, I thought about the Bradford family. I hadn't seen or spoken to any of them since the divorce, but I occasionally heard things through industry connections or social media. Richard had declared bankruptcy 2 years ago, his leveraged real estate empire finally collapsing under its own weight. Diane had divorced him 6 months later. Marcus was doing fine, still working at his father's old firm, maintaining the illusion of success. Lauren had moved to California with Trevor, posting carefully curated photos of their seemingly perfect life. And Emma? Emma was in graduate school, studying social work, trying to build a career helping people navigate complex family systems. She'd sent me an announcement when she got accepted, a simple email. Thought you might appreciate the irony. Turns out surviving a toxic system makes you good at helping others escape theirs. I'd replied with a single line. Proud of you. I meant it. Because the thing I'd learned over those 5 years wasn't about revenge or vindication or proving people wrong. It was about something more fundamental. The architecture of self. Buildings need foundations. Systems need structure. And people need frameworks that support who they actually are, not who others need them to be. For 3 years, I'd lived in a framework built by the Bradford family, trying to fit myself into a structure designed to make me fail. I documented everything, not because I wanted to weaponize it, but because I needed to understand it, to map its contours, to see clearly what was broken so I could build something better. The evidence I'd gathered hadn't been about destroying them. It had been about freeing myself, about having enough clarity to leave, enough proof to trust my own perceptions, enough documentation to remember that my version of events was valid even when everyone around me suggested otherwise. In the end, I'd used almost none of it. The divorce had been clean, the separation had been mutual. The truth had remained private, shared only between Emma and me and the lawyers who filed the paperwork. But having that evidence, knowing it existed, knowing I could use it if necessary, had given me the strength to leave on my own terms, to stop performing for an audience that would never applaud, to build a life based on my actual values rather than someone else's metrics of success. That was the real power of documentation. Not the destruction it could cause, but the clarity it provided. The way it transformed subjective experience into objective reality, making the invisible visible, the gaslit verifiable. I stood at my window, looking out at the city, the same city where Emma's family had once made me feel small, where I'd ridden the bus every morning wondering if I'd ever be enough. The view from here was different now, not because the city had changed, but because I had. I'd stopped trying to prove I belonged in rooms that weren't built for me. Instead, I'd learned to build my own rooms, with foundations strong enough to support who I actually was. Clean lines, solid structure, space for growth. An architecture of self that no one could diminish, because I'd built it from truth rather than performance, from evidence rather than assumption, from competence rather than credentials. The Bradford family had taught me what I didn't want to be. People who needed others to be small so they could feel large, who built wealth on debt and confidence on dismissal, who confused performance with substance. They'd meant to break me. Instead, they'd taught me to build. And what I'd built, carefully, methodically, with attention to every detail, was a life I didn't need to document, because I was finally living it, instead of defending it. That was the quietest victory of all, not proving them wrong, but no longer needing to. I turned away from the window, away from the view, away from the past. Tomorrow I had a meeting with the board about next year's budget. The following week, I was speaking at another conference. Next month, I was mentoring 3 junior architects who reminded me of who I used to be: talented but uncertain, competent but unrecognized, building evidence of their worth while learning that the right audience wouldn't need convincing. Life was full, complex, challenging in ways that felt productive rather than diminishing. I had work that mattered, colleagues who valued me, a future I was building by design rather than default. And somewhere in Connecticut, Richard Bradford was trying to rebuild his empire from ashes, probably still telling stories about hard work and smart decisions, probably still convinced that his way of measuring worth was the only one that mattered. I didn't hate him. I didn't think about him much at all. That was its own kind of freedom. The realization that the people who'd once loomed so large in my life had become background characters in a story I was no longer telling. I opened my laptop one final time, not to document or analyze or build evidence, but simply to work, to solve problems, to create systems that functioned well, that acknowledged human complexity, that built structures strong enough to support the people who used them. It was, I realized, what I'd always been doing. what I'd always been good at. Building things that last, starting with myself. 3 years of documentation, 97 incidents, one marriage ended, one career transformed, one life reclaimed. Sometimes the evidence you gather isn't meant to destroy. Sometimes it's meant to illuminate, to show you what's broken so clearly that you can finally build something better. Sometimes the quietest revenge is simply refusing to stay small in someone else's story. Sometimes it's choosing to become the architect of your own life, building from truth rather than performance, from clarity rather than anger. And sometimes, most of the time, that's enough.